well, I'm not going to be a mentor, and how is this going to apply to me? It's going to be about the overarching message of mentorship and fellowship. How we are called to follow Jesus, who is the ultimate mentor, and who is a mentor by showing his sacrifice all the way to the cross, and mentors us in his teaching. But then how we also can mirror that. That sometimes we're called to be followers. We're going to study people like Elijah and Elisha, how Elisha was called to follow Elijah, and then he took up Elijah's mantle. We'll talk about Paul and Timothy, and how Paul led Timothy, mentored him, how Timothy was brought up by his grandmother, and how she had an influence in his life. We talk about different characters throughout the Bible that remind us of the importance of being people of light, people that others can reflect because Christ is reflected in them. We start by some teachings from Jesus that remind us that a mentor, that a follower of Christ first and foremost, has the heart of religion, not just the form. From Mark, the 7th chapter, verses 1 through 8, 14 and 15, and 21 through 23. I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand, there is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile. But the things that come out are what defile. For it is written, for it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, and folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." Sisters and brothers in Christ, these are the words of God for the people of God today. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God, give me a heart that's bent on not the form, but instead about being invested in following you. And as a follower, then may my light shine just that much, that others might see you through me. Realize that I'm not perfect, and the same goes for all of us. Realize that we're not perfect, but that we can mentor with the heart. Not just be about the teachings, but be about living your ways. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing unto you, Lord, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Christian comedian Ryan Hamilton, in his stand-up act, talks about his best friend who prayed earnestly that the year that the Cleveland Cavaliers would win the NBA championship, that they would do that. In fact, after the Cavaliers had won, he was talking about how some people in this country can get really obsessed with sports. I know that would never happen. Not in our community, that could never be the case. But, sometimes really obsessed, that his friend was really obsessed with that. And he told them after they won the championship, that he had prayed earnestly and deeply for the Cavaliers to win. Now, Hamilton looked at his friend and thought to himself, I think he's got his priorities a little messed up. You see, Hamilton knew that his friend was between jobs. He knew also that his relationships had not gone that well, that he had gone through a divorce or two and some other brokenness, and he realized too that his bank account might not clear the next month's rent. And so he said to his friend, I think you got your priorities a little out of whack. If you're praying earnestly and deeply for the Cavaliers to win, maybe you ought to try that on something else. And maybe God, and this is the joke part, maybe God's looking down at you and going, well, all right, if that's what you really want, I'll give you that, but maybe you want to think about praying for the other things that are broken in your life. And then Hamilton says, and I don't think that LeBron James, the star for the Cleveland Cavaliers back then, has been saying many prayers to help you out in return. The point of this joke for me is that we as Christians can often get ourselves focused on the wrong things. We've talked about that. We can be focused on the wrong fears. We can be focused on the wrong ways of living at times. And our prayer life can even be misfocused. Jesus in his teachings today reminds all of us of a principle that I almost feel like we all want to say, yeah, I know that, but at the same time, don't really live it. The disciples, they're grabbing the food, they're going there, it's almost like they were at a Selinsgrove football game or whatever football game it is. You didn't get time to wash your hands, you're getting that good fish sandwich from the bandstand. You know the band always has the best food. Getting a good fish sandwich from the bandstand and the french fries, and you're getting ready and you're eating it, and you're just going about it, right? And the disciples, they're doing that. Now, preschool for us starts this Tuesday, and we do teach the children. I know Miss Michelle and the staff always teach the children that washing your hands, Marianne, you probably do the same thing. Washing your hands is a good thing to do before meals, good thing to do in general, right? But that's not because we're going to judge them if they don't wash their hands. It's not because someone's standing outside the bandstand saying, could you imagine this? They go up to you, did you wash your hands before you eat that sausage sandwich? No, that's probably not going to happen. We're not going to judge somebody on that. But the disciples, they're Jewish, many of them, and Jesus is watching them, and the Pharisees are coming up and saying, look, they're not following the traditions. They're not washing their hands. Yet. What? Yeah. You do that in preschool. We're probably not going to do that today, though. Did you wash your hands? Did you sing the, is it ABCs twice through? Okay, now Marianne, where am I? I was with the disciples, so I was getting to the Bible. It's that thing we read every week, you know, hopefully daily, right? Okay, side commentary over. It's that, well, you know, that's why the acolyte thing didn't work out well and all that. We didn't want you to get stuck with the form of religion or the traditions. We want you to have the heart of religion. It was all just a metaphor for the sermon today. Go along with me, right? Yeah, it was just so, the scripture. The disciples weren't following the traditions. And there was nothing wrong with the traditions. There was nothing wrong with the ritual cleanings that had been taught in the Old Testament. There was nothing wrong at all with them. But they weren't what's going to bring them a heart and a relationship with God. The Pharisees were like, listen, they're not following traditions. Don't you have something to say about that, Jesus? And we would say, oh, I know what Jesus is going to say, right? We would say that 2,000 years later. He's going to say, listen, Isaiah talked about these people. He said, listen, you want to worship your traditions, but not worship really the Lord. You want really the form of religion, but not the heart of the religion. You worship me in vain. You hang more onto the traditions than the commandments of God. And then later on, Jesus says, listen, it's not these traditions that will describe whether you are defiled, whether sin is clinging to you and you can't let go of it. It's what comes out of your mouth. It's the words of encouragement. It's the actions of being in the light. That is what will define who you are. And then he goes on to say that probably many of us have in the darkness these actions that cling to us. These actions that weigh us down. They are what defines who we are, not the form of religion, but instead the heart of religion. Now, why is this teaching important? Well, first and foremost, it's kind of that common sense teaching, right? Hey, what you say is really what describes who you are. What comes out of your mouth, how you act, that tells us about your character, not whether you can follow the form and the traditions well. That's kind of something we probably know in our hearts already. But the other reason why it's very important is it helps us to mark the fact that it's not the forms of going through things that mark who we are. It's not how those things will define us as someone to be looked up to or be a mentor to. It's instead living the life that will cause us to be a mentor. Bob Tannehill, my professor that I talked about with the children, he was a New Testament professor. I swore that he knew the New Testament just as well as maybe those who wrote that down, those disciples that wrote the New Testament down. He knew all the theories, he knew it backwards and forwards. He had wrote one of the preeminent volumes on Luke and Acts, and the 2-volume set, and how it was a narrative arc. He knew everything. And yet I'll never forget his last sermon, because he retired as dean of my seminary while I was still there. His last sermon was how he had failed us. And I'm sitting there going, wow, you know, I learned so much from you. I thought you were a humble man. You were someone I knew had meekness, and meekness, like you said last week, isn't weakness. It's instead living strong for the Lord and living the character of the Lord, not the form of religion like we're talking about today, but the heart of religion. We're talking about how he had failed, how he had made mistakes, and God, this is somebody who truly gets the gospel. Truly gets that none of us perfectly live up to being a role model, a mentor, someone to look up to. We all make mistakes. But how we are still mentors with the heart is that we admit our mistakes. We let Christ's light shine through us. We try our best to use our words, what comes out of our mouth, that can either defile us or describe us as people with Christian character. What comes out of our mouth to either build up, encourage, or to tear down. And I felt like he was building us up. He was remarking how he wasn't perfect. This person who studied and was a deep scholar, who tried to live it out compassionately, how he had made mistakes. To me, that was someone to look up to that day. Someone who was real, authentic, wasn't worried about the form of religion. Believe me, as much as we think this scripture just is common sense, yet what comes out of your mouth is what describes you. And if you're just worried about the traditions and hanging on to the traditions, you're not following God's commands. As much as that makes sense, I almost feel like I'm cheating, preaching it to you, right? Hey, Jesus said it, do it, right? That's the case, right? But as much as that makes sense, how often we fall into the trap of not living up to what Bob Tannehill was trying to describe to us, of being kind and compassionate and using words to encourage and build up. How often we fall into the trap of living the form. Let me criticize when they don't do that tradition right. Let me criticize when they don't wash their hands right there. Let me tear down what's going on over here, living the form and not building up. Carrie Inhofe, popular Christian blogger right now, has this line that I like. If all you bring to a conversation is criticism, then you didn't bring anything to the conversation at all. If all you bring to the conversation is criticism, then you didn't bring anything to the conversation at all. Jesus could tell us when things were right. He gave a critical assessment of what the Pharisees were doing. The traditions are weighing you down if you don't have the heart of religion. But then he went on to bring something more to the conversation. Let me tell you, what the disciples are doing is trying to be my followers. They're trying to live the way. They're trying not to do secret acts in the dark, instead live into the light. They're trying to bring something to make the kingdom. And I am here to sacrifice. My actions are going to be ones of forgiveness. I can tell you when you have the heart, when you have the form of religion, then I'm going to show you what the heart of religion is all the way to the cross. And I'm going to sacrifice and be kind and compassionate to those who have no power, to those who need built up. Sisters and brothers in Christ, we can all have a form of religion. We can all get misfocused in our prayer life, like Ryan Hamilton's friend, who was so worried about the calves, but not worried about the life that he was living. We can all have forms, prayer lives, that worry about the superficial, the trivial, the mundane. And let me tell you, I can have the form of religion. I just had a pre-charge conference breakfast, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's about how we're going to run the annual business meeting of our church. And let me tell you, that felt like form. In fact, I was given forms. In case it didn't feel like form, I was given forms to fill out. So it really felt like form, right? Those things can take over so fast. The trivial, the mundane, the form, the traditions, making sure all the boxes are checked right. Jesus wasn't concerned about getting all the boxes checked right in the form. He was instead making sure your heart was circumcised so that you truly lift up and encourage, that you brought more than criticism to this world. You brought making a difference, shining a light so that someone would want to follow the way you live, so that you mentored not with the form of religion, but you mentored with the heart. Jesus mentored with the heart to the disciples. He mentors with the heart to us still today by the power of the Holy Spirit, and he calls us to be that type of mentor too. Mentoring not with the form, but the heart. May we not get hung up on the trivial and mundane. May we not judge or be critical When someone doesn't do the traditions the way we would like them to do, may we instead be encouragers. And may we mentor with the heart in which we build others up, knowing that what comes out of our mouth, as Jesus said, is what truly describes who we are. May we do this, knowing as Bob Tannehill did, that he wasn't perfect, but he was real, authentic, truly there for those who needed listening and encouragement. Let us pray. Almighty God, the traditions, Lord, when they build up, there is nothing wrong with them. The traditions teach us of the Scriptures. They teach us the songs of faith. They give us a form and a liturgy in which we confess our sins, in which we come and bless communion together, in which we live as the people of God. But when the traditions and the form and the forms and the trivial and the mundane take over, then we don't live with the heart. We have the form of religion, but not really the heart of religion. Lord, you ask us to go deeper, to have the heart, knowing that we're not perfect, knowing that we're not to have that calling to mentor with the heart so as to drag us down and to say, well, I'm not perfect, so I got guilt and shame, and I might as well just call it quits. No, we need forgiveness, compassion, salvation, and grace. You mentored all the way to the cross to show us the way of sacrifice. You spoke words that said, don't just be critical of what the disciples are doing. Add something. Bring something to the table. Help us to bring something to the table. Even though we are flawed, imperfect, even though we have sin that can cleave to us, even though, as our opening call to worship says, we need to rise above that, we also know, too, that we need to be willing to bring and welcome others to the table. We cannot have the form of the heart. Guide us to have the heart of religion this day and always. In your name we pray. Amen.